Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast for the She Shift. My name is Melissa Clark, and I'm founder of the She Shift. And the She Shift promotes and empowers women and girls. And I started this podcast as a way to highlight amazing women all over the world who are inspiring and empowering other women in their lives. So today I'm very excited to have Alelia Bundles as my guest. Welcome.
Hi, glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And you are, just finding out more about you, I realized how amazing you are in all of your accomplishments. And I really was thrilled to invite you to be on the podcast to share some of your stories. So just to give a little bit about your background, you're an author and journalist, and you worked for 30 years in the news industry for NBC and ABC. And you are on your fifth book, I believe, which is absolutely amazing. And I have to, again, as we talked about this before a little bit, and the way I found you, and basically, we talked about your great-great-grandmother was an amazing woman as well, and your great-grandmother. And in my book, The She Shift, I talk about women from the past century who have paved the way for other women. And your great-great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker, invented a hair care product. And I mentioned her and her humble beginnings, and I really thought it was important. It would relate to so many women. And then I saw online that your book about her is being turned into a docuseries with Octavia Spencer. And
Right.
with the help of LeBron James producing. And I happened to find your website, and then I realized you're her great-great-granddaughter. And, all of these, I started reading about all of your accomplishments, that you went to Harvard, and your success in the news industry and your books and all of these things that you've accomplished. And I said, I have to have her on my podcast.
Well, and
So,
I'm just so glad to talk to you and to learn about the things that you're doing and all the people that you're reaching. It's
thank you.
women really do have to collaborate. So I'm really happy to be talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's start off and talk a little bit about your background and your family and your history, because I think that a lot of people will be interested in that. So I'll turn
So,
it over to you.
I grew up with two parents who really encouraged me to do things that I love doing. They both were in the hair care business. My mother worked at the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company
Mhm.
that had been founded by her great grandmother. And my dad actually was president of a company called Summit Laboratory. So technically they were competitors. My dad had worked for a little while for the Walker Company, but when I was growing up, the Walker Company had really lost some of its market share, and Summit Labs was the more successful of the two. But both of my parents really encouraged me to do what I loved to do, and that turned out to be writing. So I was the kid on the journalism, on the newspaper in junior high school and high school, and really followed that dream and worked in network television news, as you mentioned, for 30 years. But all the while on the side, I was doing research about my great-great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker, and her daughter, Alelia Walker. And there had never really been any books written about them. So that was how I ended up on this journey, combining this family story, but developing, thank goodness my parents encouraged me to develop my own career so I'd have my own thing.
Mhm.
But the beautiful poetic circle is that I am now telling the story of this amazing great-great-grandmother.
It's really fascinating. And so tell us a little bit about your journey and what was your passion to go into the news industry? And I know, and you can tell us a little bit more about your books and that journey too, because I'm, as an author myself, I know that, and there's a lot of people who listen to this are authors or who would like to write and publish a book. And I think, that's an interesting journey for people as well.
Well, it really did start out as a passion. I can't carry a tune, so I was never going to be a singer.
I'm with you on that.
I'm not a physics whiz, so I wasn't going to win a Nobel Prize in physics. But my real love from a really early age was writing. I wrote a little short story when I was 8 years old, and one of my mother's friends, who was a teacher saw the story. It was about going to the moon, and this is before America had gone to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And she sent it to a magazine. So I had a little byline when I was 8 years old. I think the more important thing for me is that I just was so excited that I could look at a picture and try to recreate a feeling. And that really carried me through. And so in my mind, I was a writer, and I did the junior high school newspaper and all of that. When I got to college, the newspaper was like more work than I wanted to do. It was very competitive. And so I worked at the radio station, and that opened up the doors for broadcasting for me. And that I was actually a jazz DJ. So I was still following a passion, still loving doing that. And when I worked for a year at DuPont in business and public affairs. And then I went to Columbia for graduate school, and, just really whatever doors opened, I was ready for them. And it really was in 1975, at the moment when women were really beginning to be hired, because women had sued Newsweek and NBC, and because they were not being promoted. They would be hired and they would stay secretaries, and they might get to be researchers, and guys became producers. So that lawsuit, I was a beneficiary of that era, with those doors opening up, and, fortunately was able to take advantage of that. But I will just say, while I was in graduate school, one of my professors, a woman named Phyllis Garland, who was the first, and at that time only, Black woman tenured professor at Columbia, recognized my name, Alelia. And it is, for your audience, it's A''Lelia. It is not a normal name, but it was Madam Walker's daughter's name. And Phyllis, whose mother had been a real pioneer in journalism, she'd been an editor of the Pittsburgh Courier, said to me, as I was telling her my very lame ideas for a master's paper, at the end of that conversation, she just kind of looked at me bored, and she said, "Your name is Alelia. Do you have any connection to Madam C.J. Walker and Alelia Walker?" And I'm pretty sure Phil knew the answer to that question. But I said, "Yes, that's my family." And she said, "That's what you're going to write about." So that was 1975. And I mean, I just really am always, the power of a professor to change your life, to set you on a path. And she really did. That's been many, many, many years ago. But she validated that story for me when nobody else was.
Wow, that's really inspiring and interesting. And like you said, it was like a pivotal point a moment in your life. And I think it's fascinating that you talk about women in that era and in that time and what was going on. And also, in the news industry, and just being in that over 30 years, I mean, it must have been so interesting for you to be where you were and what you were doing, and seeing not only just the women in that industry, but in the world, and everything that happened over, those decades, and those, in that industry, because you were at the forefront, being, I'm sure, in the news industry, seeing the world changes. So, I think that's an interesting time, and something that, I'm sure it helped shape you as well. So.
It's really, having been a part of that kind of first shock waves of women, going into law schools, women in medical schools, when that tipping point came, when half the women who were enrolled in medical school, it was women, made up half the student population in medical schools. But prior to that, there was a lot of, those doors were not opened. And so my generation really was the first group in large numbers. Now, we went through all of those things where, I don't have kids of my own. I have a lot of wonderful godchildren, but a lot of us did not have children because it was really hard to balance that. And some people, some people did, some people didn't. But almost 8 to 10 years younger than me, a lot more of my colleagues who worked in news did have children. So there's, sort of some interesting choices that people had to make during that period of time.
Sure.
It was also seeing those doors open, but also seeing, when we're seeing all of the Me Too things that, that are happening now, you just really had to deal with that. Sure. And then we watch, I think, women who are, 20, 30 or so years younger than we are, who just didn't take seriously this need to be feminist. And I think are now seeing you cannot take these rights for granted. So it isn't, we have this interesting evolution that happens. And I mean, I think we all can learn from each other. I certainly am always glad to learn from younger women,
Sure.
how they navigate some things that I didn't navigate so well. And I hope I have some things to say to them as well.
Sure. And that's such a great point, because I feel the same way insofar as I always learn from other women. And even like you said, I learned from a lot of women who are younger than me, who are in the millennial generation. And it's fascinating to see, I think, because they have a confidence about them. And it's amazing to be able to, like you said, learn certain things from them. And what do you think about the world as it is today with women empowerment? I mean, that's where even the She Shift came about, because I started to see something happening where now there's female only co-working spaces, and there's all of these empowering groups where women are supporting each other. And, so I found it really fascinating to see that this shift, so to speak, is taking place. And do you feel that, there is that kind of movement happening? And, what do you think about this current era for women?
Well, it is a really complicated time because there are women who are not going to go back and who are going to keep pushing forward. But whenever there is progress, I mean, that's one of the things that I have learned from studying history. Whenever there is progress, there is backlash. And I think we are seeing that many of the rights that we have taken for granted in terms of our reproductive rights, in terms of our right to be in the workplace, in terms of the Me Too movement, that all of the things that we are pushing for and that we have become accustomed to, there is always going to be an element in the world that really does not want women to have rights. And it just seems so bizarre to me that there would be anybody who would be trying to stand in my way. But I think that's very real. So we can see that women are insisting on being taken seriously and insisting on being in leadership roles, and are taking control in many ways. But maybe it's, maybe we get stronger because we have to fight more. Maybe that's really part of the lesson here.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated too, because I come across in what I'm doing in my mission, I connect with so many women like yourself and other women who are doing these amazing things. So, I feel this energy it's just an empowering time. So, hopefully that will continue. And I always think it's very important to pass that on to the next generation, I say, of female leaders, and help build the confidence of young girls and women as well, because they're the next ones coming up. So,
I look at my goddaughter is an editor at The Atlantic, and I just kind of am in awe of her and how she is so forceful and diplomatic and smart. And, and I just kind of, as I say, I'm just kind of in awe of watching her and what she does.
Yeah, it's inspiring, isn't it? I feel like, again, I come across same thing. I come across all of these, and of all ages, but really the next generation coming up, they have this confidence about them it's very inspiring. So,
Right.
That's a great thing, I think, for the next generation and for the next several decades. So now, what are you working on now? I know you have your book, and what are you working on that everybody should know about?
So but right behind me are my,
That's wonderful.
But
That's a great collection.
As you mentioned, I'm working on my 5th book. So my very first book was a young adult biography about Madam C.J. Walker. And that came out in 1991. And then I wrote On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, which was really the first major comprehensive biography of Madam Walker. That came out in 2001. And that is the book that is in development right now as an 8-part series on Netflix. Starring Octavia Spencer. It's taken, and you hear these stories about, oh my God, you wrote a book and it took 50 years for it to finally be made into a movie or whatever. So it has taken not quite 20 years, but almost that. And lots of, anybody who has dealt with Hollywood, you think you have a deal and then you don't have a deal, and back and forth, and it's not quite the deal you want. but I think we really are finally there, so that we're looking, the scripts are being written right now, and it's kind of a tentative schedule to shoot. So I'm very excited about that.
Definitely.
So that Madam Walker's story will be told to a larger audience. And I can't believe it's eight different segments. So I'm just like stunned that we're going to have that. And now I'm writing about Madam Walker's daughter, my namesake, Alelia Walker, who was born in 1885, died in 1931, and moved to Harlem in 1913. So she is very much a part of the Harlem Renaissance. She knew everybody, all of the political figures, the writers, the musicians, the actors, the dancers, and her houses, because her mother had made so much money in hair care. She had 3 residences, a mansion in Irvington, New York, that's a National Historic Landmark, a townhouse on 136th Street, and then a pied-à-terre, a little apartment on Edgecombe Avenue in New York City.
Wow.
So everybody loved coming to her party. And she traveled internationally. She went to, in 1921 and 22, she went to Paris, London, Monte Carlo, Cairo. She went to Addis Ababa, where she visited the Empress. So she's really a fascinating person, and in some ways has been kind of overshadowed by her mother's story, because it is part of that, the first generation entrepreneur, self-made.
Sure.
It's very hard to be the child of somebody like that and be compared. So a little bit of the story is the tension that is created around that narrative.
Wow, this sounds fascinating, and I can't wait for the Netflix series, and I can't wait for your other book to come out. So that's really wonderful. So where can everyone find out more about you? Because I think everybody should know about you and what you're doing in your projects and your books. But before I do that, actually, let me just go back for 1 second. What's a piece of advice that you would give to a woman looking to take the next step in her business, or an author who would like to write their own book? What's a piece of advice that you would offer to somebody?
Well, I think one of the things that I realize now that I didn't know then, but that was just sort of organic to me, is to volunteer your time, is to be generous of spirit. And some of that came from, there were points in my career when I was frustrated. I had a wonderful career overall, but there were times when I might have a boss who was kind of a jerk, or, or I wasn't getting to do something that I wanted to do. And I channeled some of that energy into working with my alumni organizations, both at Harvard and Radcliffe and at Columbia. And those relationships, that volunteering and being on a couple of nonprofit boards, I've never been on a for-profit board. That would have been nice, but on those nonprofit boards where you're not getting paid, but you are getting paid in many ways, in developing relationships. So I would say that builds equity in you, and you're building equity in other people. So over the decades, I can see that those relationships that I developed from being a part of nonprofit organizations has really made a difference for me.
That's a really wonderful piece of advice. And one more thing before we go to your contact information, what really do you, and you have such, a great family history, and you've accomplished so much. So what would you really want to leave as your legacy?
I hope that I have, in a couple of different ways, I hope that I have made the story, especially of African-American women in America, that I have helped to retell that story so that we are recognized for all the many dimensions and the contributions that we've made. When I began to write about my great-great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker, I knew the sort of basic story. She was born on a plantation in Delta, Louisiana, orphaned at 7, married at 14, a mother at 20, a widow, and a washerwoman who developed a business and became a millionaire. And for me, most important, became a philanthropist who empowered other women. So I wanted to write the story that I wish had been written for me. That I didn't have any of that in my history books when I was growing up. So I'd like to leave that contribution that I have, helped to tell make this American story more multidimensional. And, and I'd also like to, be able to leave a legacy that I helped to mentor some people, and that, you know, that I helped to give some good advice, and, you know, was a good friend.
Sure. That's absolutely wonderful. I think that's, you know, the idea of leaving behind that story, a story, like you said, that you wish you had. I think that's going to really have an impact on so many, as I said, future girls growing up. And that's really important. So now where can we find out a little bit more information about you?
So my website is aleliabundles.com, ALELIA bundles.com. And then that connects to madamcjwalker.com and to madamcjwalkerbeautyculture.com. So these different projects, this is, and I think this is something, that I think that when you're in your 20s and 30s, you don't necessarily know that you're planting seeds in those decades that may not blossom until your 40s and 50s and 60s. But they do ultimately blossom. So I was just putting one foot in front of the other, doing this research, writing about Madam Walker. And now we're at a point where there is now the Netflix series. I'm a consultant, a historical consultant to Madam C.J. Walker Beauty Culture, which is a line of hair care products manufactured by Sundial Brands and at Sephora. So I get to help them tell their story. Bella Lawaro is a National Historic Landmark and a National Trust National Treasure. We are getting ready to have a renaming ceremony of 136th Street in Harlem, where Madam Walker and A'Lelia Walker's home was. We did a postage stamp. So there are all of these little things that just seem to be coming together in this year as we observe the 150th anniversary of Madam Walker's birth. And then next year will be the 100th anniversary of her death. So aleliabundles.com, and I post things there. I'm also, I just started doing Instagram.
That's okay. Yeah,
I've had an account for about 5 years, and I had one post until about 3 weeks ago. And I'm just I've sort of figured out, I'm a big, presence on Facebook. I have a lot of conversations on Facebook. I kind of lurk on Twitter. I don't really post a lot because I don't want to get into arguments with people. But Instagram, I've sort of figured out that's a place where I can post interesting photographs and inspirational things. So I'm in all those places.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that, and I'll definitely be sharing that information as well. And I just want to thank you and congratulate you on all of the wonderful things you're doing and putting out into the world. And I look forward to staying in touch and hearing more and sharing your story with so many other women to be inspired. So thank you again, and I will definitely be, looking into more of your projects in the future.
And yours. I really am glad to know about you and to know about She Shift, and we'll have to talk when the movie comes out.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, A'Lelia, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right.
Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.